I'm Barb Talent. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been evaluating and working with children who have various learning and attentional and developmental problems for over 40 years. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what is a learning disability and how do I know if my child has one? Well, a learning disability in the basic sense of the word is a neurologically based processing weakness that interferes with a person's ability to learn some aspects of academics, reading or writing or math, at the level we would expect given their ability. How do we evaluate whether or not a child has a learning disability? For us, an evaluation is a process and involves several steps. It's much more than a collection of scores. What we're trying to do really is to understand how a child processes information, how information makes sense to that child, and if there is a breakdown, where is that breakdown? The first step is to sit down with parents and to get background. We call that an intake. So we'll sit down with parents for about an hour and talk about the child's history, what interventions have been tried, what's been going on in school, what feedback parents have gotten. But we're also trying to understand the child as a whole. What are his strengths? What does he like to do? How does she get along with other kids? How does she get along at home with siblings or with parents? What does the child like to do during his or her free time? We want to try to get a picture of a whole picture, as I say, of that child. We also need to collect information from other sources. We certainly get information from school. We have questionnaires that we send out and ask teachers to complete. If the child has worked with a tutor or a language specialist or an occupational specialist, we want to get information from those people as well. The next step involves testing with the child directly, we usually meet with kids a couple of times. Testing is a way of sampling behavior, and a few hours with a child is a small enough piece in their lives. We want to see them on at least a couple of occasions. Sometimes it's more than that. We used a variety of different kinds of tests. What we're looking for from the tests is information processing, some ability level to see where do we think the child should be learning. As I say, looking at different kinds of processing, language processing, visual, spatial, memory, some motor skills, or at least fine motor skills sometimes, and then academics, looking at their reading and spelling and writing and math to see where they are there. Equally important to the actual tests and the scores are our observations. All of our testing is done on a one-to-one, and that gives us an opportunity to listen to the quality of the child's responses, to watch the way they approach tasks. Everything we do goes from easier to harder, and actually you have to, on most of these tests, you have to take a child to the point where they're failing or where they've reached a ceiling. How does the child react as things get more difficult for them? Now, we're not therapists, so we're not going to do a big, long, in-depth evaluation of a child's emotional condition, but we have to look at how they are feeling about all this. I always say I'm a clinical psychologist. I got into this years ago dealing with kids with more typical clinical psychology problems, kids who were depressed or acting out. And as I worked with them, I would see that they were struggling in school for 6 hours a day and then add on homework from that, and I think, well, I'd be depressed too. So we always have to consider where the kid is coming from emotionally. One of the things we always talk about is that people have a balloon inside their head, and we call it a stress balloon. And when people are stressed, that balloon blows up, and it gets so full that nothing can get in. People have all had experiences with adults who've been stressed, where you're trying to talk about something, and all you're getting back is yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. What you're saying is bouncing right off. And the other thing that happens when you get stressed and that balloon blows up is that it takes all the room up in your head and you can't get to your own cognitive strengths. And that's what often happens to the kids that we work with. They don't necessarily have a formal emotional diagnosis per se, but they're stressed because they've been struggling and running into walls, and they do want to be successful, and they're not being successful, and they're frustrated, and that frustration, that emotional state, being discouraged, affects their self-esteem, and then that affects their learning as well. One of the most important things that can come out of this evaluation is for all the adults who are working with this child, parents, teachers, other therapists, tutors, to understand where this child is coming from and to see the world from that child's point of view so that they can provide more support from an academic and learning point of view, or part to help that child be successful there, but also to provide some emotional support to help the child feel understood, that we believe in them, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.